Happy New Year again! Happy New Chinese New Year! Because today is the start of the year of the tiger. So it's not my year and it's not my daughter's year because we are roosters. Cock-a-doodle-doo! And it's not my husband's year either because he is a dragon. But he doesn't usually breathe fire. To celebrate the Chinese New Year, I recorded a conversation for you with my friend Diane, and she tells us all about living in China, about how China has changed since the 1990s, and about learning Mandarin Chinese.
And I did that slowly.
Hello, Diane.
Hi.
Now, Diane is from the American Midwest, but I can never remember if she's from Iowa or Ohio.
Mhm.
Diane, where are you from?
I'm originally from Ohio. I did also live in Illinois, another part of the Midwest, but I now live in Iowa. In between there, I lived in Colorado and in China.
Now, that's the reason I wanted you to chat to us today. I met Diane because Diane is actually a Mandarin teacher. And when my daughter and I were in Agen, as you have heard about now, a few years ago, we actually did Chinese for fun. Well, I call it Chinese. I think I'm supposed to say Mandarin.
Or Mandarin Chinese, because Chinese has so many different possible dialects. Mandarin is just maybe the most prevalent one, and it's the one that the government of China established as standard. So it's taught in schools and it's used on TV. And so it's kind of, we call it a lingua franca, which, people use it more, but people in different regions of China speak different dialects along with maybe speaking Mandarin. So it's a good one to know if you want to be able to talk with people from anywhere in China.
Before I forget, Diane even has a YouTube channel now to help teachers of Chinese and people who are learning Chinese. So I'll put a link in the description. But now what I really wanted to talk to you about was China and how it's changed, because I went to China, Diane, but it was a long time ago. It was in 1991, I think. And I remember I remember Beijing, which is the capital, with very wide roads, but not a lot of cars. I remember lanes and lanes and lanes, lines and lines and lines of bicycles.
Yeah, that's old China.
Yeah, the old China.
It's not what you
I
see
did
now.
talk about visiting the Great Wall as well, which is behind you now.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually slept on the Great Wall. Did you know that?
Wow. I think I do remember. That's cool. There are some specialized tours. You can hike the Great Wall, like into the countryside around it, but there are also very big tourist sites with thousands of people crowded there. So you can do both. You can do a very polished tour, or you can do something more adventuresome like you did.
Okay, so tell us, Diane, how did you get interested in Chinese? How did you learn Chinese? Have you lived in China?
Yes, yeah. So we've said I was from Ohio. At the time, I graduated from high school in 1991. And at that time, I would say it was still very unusual for people from Ohio to travel to Asia at all. But I had been in Thailand when I was 16. And I had friends whose families had emigrated to the US from Asia, from India and from Taiwan. And so I had always been kind of interested in Asian countries and eventually became interested in China and Chinese. Had a good friend from Japan for a while. So a lot of East and Southeast Asia formed part of my childhood, even though it wasn't real close contact. I was interested and curious and open to learning. So I loved being in Thailand. I was there for a summer. And after I came back, I thought, well, how do I keep up some kind of connection to that part of the world? And eventually in college, I studied Mandarin Chinese and then eventually moved there, traveled for a couple of summers in the late 1990s. Interesting, like you said, 1991, Beijing's airport in 1991 and again in 1997 was small, very like what I would expect maybe from the 1950s in the US, like a not a very polished or modern looking place. When I went back in 1999, 2 years later, the difference was unbelievable. It was the most modern airport and beautiful and tall and glass and fancy. The changes are fast. And so from 1997 to 1999, it changed. Imagine how much more has changed since. So I lived in China from 2001, January 2001, through March 2004. And I lived in the Southwest. So Kunming is the name of the city. It has 3 to 4 million people, but many people outside China have never heard of it. And so Kunming is the place you could look up if you're curious. So really interesting part of China, a lot of different ethnicities and a lot of different climates and terrains in that part of China. So it was a mile-high city is what we would call it, very high altitude there. So it had a milder summer and a milder winter too, because it was so far south. So I think it was a fascinating place to be. And I was there about for 3.5 to 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. So along with learning Mandarin there, I worked there. I also learned some of the local dialect. So I can say a little bit, but I can understand a lot more, which is very handy because most of the time people spoke in the local dialect unless it was a formal setting. Like we said, Mandarin is an official language, but it's not necessarily what people speak with their friends. So I heard both all the time, actually many different dialects and local languages of different ethnic groups. So China is not just one ethnicity and not just one language speaking. There's a lot of variety.
So how did you find living in China compared to living in the US? It must have been very different.
Yeah, I really enjoyed many things about being in China. And I lived in a big city and I lived in a small town. And my first couple years, I learned a lot, both of language and some of the cultural expectations that were around me. That you can't really study those things well in a book. You need to learn them through friendships and learning sometimes by the hard way. So I have a story about doing that. Would you like me to tell you about it?
Yeah, that could be quite fun.
Okay, so I was in China when I was in my late 20s. And the expectations, I kind of knew there was an expectation in China at the time that people would get married and they expected it to be a heterosexual marriage, and they expected you would have a child by about age 30. And if you did not, they would really be worried about you. And maybe your parents or your friends would try to set you up. They try to set you up with someone they thought would be a suitable partner for you. And so it's kindly meant, but sometimes there was this assumption going in. So I kind of knew that. But then one day I had friends who we all went out to dinner together. They were either married or one was an older man in his 70s. He wasn't interested. And they were asking me, well, what kind of a man would you be interested in? And I thought, well, okay, idle conversation, right? Nobody's thinking anything deep about it. They're just asking, what kind of person might you find interesting? And So I said a few things about maybe, you know, and then someone said, well, would you be willing to meet a Chinese man? Or they didn't say meet. They said, like, you know, would you marry a Chinese man? And so I'm thinking, again, they're thinking hypothetically, and it's like, oh, sure. And the word that I used in Chinese was a word that I learned about later that had a different connotation. I thought what I was saying was, yeah, I'd be open to considering someone who's not white like myself. I would be open to considering marrying a Chinese man. Yeah. But the way that I learned later, because of the story, what I said was, yes, please help make that possible for me, pretty much was the meaning of what I said. So if you know any Mandarin, I said the word 愿意, 我愿意, which is much stronger than I realized. I thought I was thinking with my English mind and translating it, and it doesn't work so well doing that. You have to learn the local way of using those words in context. And so what happened was I didn't realize that these friends then maybe even talk to each other. How can we help her meet someone? And they, you know, they cared about me and they liked me and we were friends. So the elderly man from that dinner called me the next week maybe, and he's talking about, you know, he was a Chinese medical doctor. He had this exposition he was going to go to. Was I interested in going? And I had a lot of things going on and I felt a little uncomfortable and I didn't really want to go. So I turned him down. Well, he called again and there was some other event like a couple days later. And I thought, why does he keep doing this? And he said, the line he said, and I'm translating what he said, like, but there are friends there of your qualifications. And I realized he does not just mean like, let's make some friends. They're trying to set me up with someone. And so I was kind of embarrassed and I really wasn't ready for that. I mean, I was all thinking hypothetically, maybe and someday it'll happen. And they were thinking, let's help her out. Let's get this going. At least he was. And so I thought, you know, I wanted to keep our relationship good. And I had learned at least enough to not be really culturally inappropriate in my reply. I wanted to be kind to him and soften my answer. And so I thought on the spot, like, how can I turn this down gently? So what I said was I threw my parents under the bus. This is an American phrase for blaming someone else for your own problem. So what I said was, oh, I'm afraid my parents won't feel comfortable if I'm seeing someone that they have not met. And my elderly friend who was talking to me was, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't have, I didn't mean to suggest any awkward meaning, kind of, I'm translating what he said again. And so, he didn't continue to call or try to invite me to events or anything, but I realized, I thought back about that dinner and like, but I just said I was, maybe I need to check what that word means. And sure enough, oh boy. So you start to learn over time. But I had a lot of really wonderful experiences in China, and it shapes who I am now. One of the things I got to do while I lived there was, I mentioned I lived in a big city and then in a smaller town. I also knew people in villages and farmers. And there were so many things that I liked about the very connected to nature way that they had to live. And I now have a big garden and a flock of chickens, partly, maybe even majorly, because of meeting those friends and seeing their caretaking of their animals and their crops. So I learned a lot.
It's interesting, as like you say as well, to when you're traveling, to know a little bit about the difference in cultures between your own country and another country as well, because sometimes you can make some mistakes.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
have a story in, you said you were in Thailand. I actually worked in Thailand.
Oh,
And
I don't. Okay.
I was teaching English in a primary school for a few months while I was traveling. And the Thai people have a lot of customs. And you know, when you're trying to make yourself understood in your own language to other people, you try and use signs and you do things. And I was trying to explain that something was very tall. And so I stood on a pile of books.
Oh.
And books are, I mean, books are sacred, but books in Thailand are sacred.
And the bottom of your
class
is bad.
Sorry.
The bottom of your feet in Thailand, if you show the bottom of your feet, it's like the middle finger from the US, at least in the US, it's a strong negative.
Yeah, very rude.
So stepping on something is a big deal.
Yeah, so the poor little primary school children looked at me in horror. What is the teacher doing standing on the books?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you find out? Just the look on the faces of the children?
Well, yeah, by the look on the faces, I realized that I was doing something they didn't appreciate. So I just got down from the book and looked very apologetic.
Yeah. So you mentioned seeing lots and lots of bicycles in China. I think a lot of people outside China still have that impression, like, riding bicycles. You do see a few, and people still do that, but I would say it's rare now. And the problems of traffic with cars has increased a lot, to the point that the Chinese have implemented some major public transportation changes. So in 1991, and again, when I lived there in the early 2000s, there were a lot of public buses that went everywhere in the cities. And I think that's still the case. But there are also, in the major cities, there are public transportation by train, like there's high-speed rail between cities too. And then there's these kinds of, maybe a subway system, maybe above ground train system that connects the whole city much faster and more quickly than a bus. So it's off the main streets altogether. And when I lived in China, that was only being spoken about for Kunming. And it was only started in Shanghai and Beijing already. But now each large major city in China has a system of that type, I believe. And if it's not yet built, it's underway. So there's a lot of new changes, I think, redesign of cities in China and management of transportation and where people go and when, and design of neighborhoods and how tall the buildings are. Amazing changes in 20 or 30 years. And I feel that China is now in some ways, it has the whole range from rural countryside where maybe people have a cell phone, but may not have as much technological integration in their life. But so that's still present, but all the way up to very, very high tech, well-functioning cities, more than in the United States. So I think of China as having the whole range, but being more advanced in a lot of ways in daily life than the US.
And what about traveling there? I remember, even though, of course, I was traveling with English-speaking friends, we didn't find a lot of English speakers in China at the time, and we had the Lonely Planet guide, we would show the Chinese translation of the places we wanted to go, etc. But we couldn't really communicate with anyone, which was quite frustrating for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like in China, it depends very much where you are and the age of the person you're speaking with. So everyone in China in school now takes English classes, but as maybe some of your viewers know, and as I experienced in my own language learning, it depends how much your proficiency has developed from those classes. Sometimes classes focus more on grammar study and analyzing the language. And that is hard for some people to turn into the ability to communicate during a conversation. So if you had that experience where listening and understanding and speaking was something you developed, great. You'll be able to get by. a lot of Chinese language learners have that same limitation. They may have studied English for several years, but might be better at reading English than understanding someone talking and responding in speech. So it depends, but there are many people who speak very advanced English all across China now. But my thinking is like this, like, even if there are a lot of people who speak your language in a location that you're traveling, it's much better to learn as much as you can of the language used locally, partly out of respect, partly to show that you are caring about those people and you want to understand them. You don't expect them to come to you and understand you all the time. For Americans, I think that is really good advice. We're not known for being that way. And so being more open and learning from others is important, I think, for someone who's white and someone who's an American, especially, to show that courtesy. But it's also practical, because there are words you need in that local setting that you're never going to learn in a class outside that region. And so there are many things to get by that you will learn because you're there and people use that vocabulary and those words right then. Food is maybe an obvious reason, but also, like, how do people really talk with their friends? It's fun to get to know how people really speak and be a participant. I feel like without that language learning, it's like if you imagine an ocean with a little drop of oil, like, sure, you know that ocean is down there and maybe you can see what it's like a little, but you're not participating in it unless you really know the language well. So that's my aim with Chinese.
Okay, so Diane, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thanks ever so much for your time.
Thanks. No, delighted to come and chat with you.
And so don't forget, if you want to try learning a little bit of Chinese, Diane has her YouTube channel, which might help. And so take care, Diane, and I'll perhaps see you sometime soon.
Sounds great.